And today's guest is Michael Swain. Michael, how are you doing today?
Fantastic, Sean. It's awesome to hear from you again. I feel like we haven't done this in a long time.
We haven't talked for some time, but I've been looking at your new adventures on Twitter, because you're a relatively new social media guy now.
Yeah, Twitter's going to be big someday, they tell me.
You ever thought about buying some stock? Or?
Oh yeah, I'm gonna throw all in. The wife, I can say wife now that I've been married for 7 months. I hope it's 7 months, otherwise I'm gonna get in trouble. She works in social media, and she is appalled. I picked that word very carefully. She's appalled that I've gotten into Twitter. She's an Instagram user, and apparently the fact that I like to post pictures of food that I make, but I don't like to do it on Facebook because I feel like that's not my right format. She seems to think I've picked the wrong venue, so I don't know. We'll see about that. I got 700 followers on Twitter. I'm doing okay for myself in life.
Hasn't it only been like a week and a half or something?
Yeah, but the 550 of them just came right away because the algorithm where you join a new social media, so it connects you to everybody who thinks you know.
Oh, I see.
And so anybody who had ever heard of me before, or just people who wanted to show mercy on me, clicked follow or subscribe or whatever it is you actually do in that. I still don't know. I'm new, but yeah, I've only been doing it for a week, posting pictures of baby birds and spatchcocked chicken. One not being related to the other.
Hitchhiking rodents.
Oh yeah, the biggest rodent I post pictures of is my dog.
Well, I mean, let's talk about the rat, but
well, she's kind of a rat anyway.
Well, now I think you're quite an interesting case study, specifically for the first episode, because there's quite a bit of ground to cover with you. I guess my first question would be to ask, where were you born?
I think it was Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami, Florida. I don't know the room. I'm sorry. You kind of caught me out of left field with that one. That's a baseball reference, by the way, Sean. I know you wouldn't get that.
Oh, it's like cricket. It's like cricket, but more energetic.
It's like cricket, but significantly more popular. Not with me though. I'm just being smarmy. I don't care for baseball. It's a terrible sport.
What I find interesting, specifically with modern retro culture, is that Miami in the 1980s is kind of a culture icon in terms of the 80s.
What is baseball?
Being someone that... What's that?
What is baseball?
No, just Miami, Florida in the 1980s.
Florida. Oh, yeah,
is kind
because of great. And it always will be. Do you notice that anything that turns into a retro thing now, like back in the 80s, Miami wasn't all that. But for some reason, it's nostalgically remembered. And the representation of Miami, bear in mind, I was born in 1982. Well, the representation of Miami that you see in things like, I don't want to just say like Hotline Miami, but...
Well, I was actually going to go further back, because you have Hotline Miami, you have, what's that? Oh God, what's the indie film called again?
The Witch Show?
No, the Kickstarter film.
Kung Fury.
Kung Fury, Jesus. Yeah. And then you can go even further back, and you can go to GTA Vice City, which is mainly just pop culture from the 80s.
That's basically South Beach and some Miami. Yeah, that's the.
When do you think the representation started in terms of 80s nostalgia?
When did it start? That's hard to say. I remember at the turn of the century in 2000, I graduated from high school. I was born in 82, maybe 18 about that time. I don't remember there being a huge movement towards 80s nostalgia. You had like shitty rock bands like the one called Atreyu that had named itself after the protagonist, other than Bastion from the movie The Neverending Story, which was also very popular. I think filmed from 81 or 83. I remember being early on it. I was too young to see it in theaters. But there were references, but there wasn't a huge movement towards that. And I think it started with music. Not as late as guys like Mitch Murder or what's it called, Miami Nights 1984 or something. There's all these little bands out there that are encapsulating the 80s revival now. But when did it start? That's hard to say. I remember 80s was really making a comeback on the radio around 2002 and 3, but that wasn't retro. That was just the same old tracks, because 80s had gone from being like modern pop and easy listening style music to actually to being this throwback all of a sudden.
I can't remember where I heard this. It might have been on Game Grumps or something like that. They had a similar conversation where they were saying people in the creative industry who grew up in the 80s are the ones that are now making the content.
Yeah, that makes
sense. So do you think that plays a part in what is, like, for example, what's that show? Stranger Things, for example, is made by 30-somethings who grew up in the 80s and had that kind of influence.
Yeah.
So do you think in another 10 years' time it's going to be all about 90s nostalgia?
That's hard to say, because I don't know for sure that anything like this has ever happened before. Retro and the definition of retro and what it means to feel nostalgic about something that you remember having a great feeling associated with it, which almost always is childhood, like the blissful ignorance of being a little tiny baby kid, and having your parents worry about everything for you. Granted, not everybody has that experience, but in most wealthier countries and Western world countries, that tends to be the thing. I don't know that anything was ever quite like the 80s. I don't know that we've had like a 70s revival, for example, or 60s revival. When you look at people that enjoy bands like Jefferson Airplane, eventually that would become the band Starship. Can you believe the guys that did that White Rabbit song? Those are the same ones that did We Built the City on Rock and Roll, just with a lot of band member changes and a couple of name changes for the band itself in between. Yeah. But it's more or less the same, like honorarily the same band. But all that is to say, the 70s and 60s, that music wasn't so much like a revival that suddenly occurred in like 1990, where now everybody's listening to CCR, so much as you have people who are fans of the Grateful Dead and just never stopped being that. And they clung on to it, much like you think of somebody who's a fan of disco. I happen to like disco, but I wasn't around for it. But people who are like wholly invested in that culture, in that musical culture, and watching it disappear, they just held on. I kind of feel like with the 80s, it didn't have that. I think that everybody sort of let it go in the 90s because, and again, I say everybody, but I just mean popularly, culturally, or whatever. So for the most part, I feel like people sort of transitioned into the 90s and they were just done with the 80s. Whatever, if it was the murder rates in the US that were up and people thought were going to continue skyrocketing, which is actually what the movie The Warriors is about. Gangs taking control and law being incapable of having the means of stopping it. People, I think, were happy to leave the 80s. They're happy to get away from the AIDS epidemics. They were excited to move on to new technology because everything is fantastic and new, and phones don't have cords anymore. And now there's an internet, and everything was suddenly like everyone was so bright-eyed about it. I think they just left the 80s behind, unlike the 60s and 70s and some of the musical cultures and identity cultures that had come before it. I think that in those cases, people tried to grip on and didn't really let go, but most people just sort of were done with it. But the 80s, I don't think we had a chance to ever do that. I don't know anybody in the 90s or when I was graduating who was like gripping onto the freaking 80s as though it was a part of their identity that the 90s was trying to tear away from them. I think that people just moved on. And so it happened so quickly that between 2000 and 2010, suddenly we all looked back and said, hey, I remember that song by Tears for Fears. They did that song too? Oh, that's interesting. And we all started to put the dots together because we were all really young. I'm 36 now, by the way. And I've already had my like 80s revolution. I'm good now. But I think to me, that's the difference. I'm missing on a lot of very important points. Believe me, Sean, you know me. I can talk for an hour without breathing.
I know, that's why you're a great first guest. So.
Yeah, that's right. Because I will
ramble on about the 80s forever.
But at the risk of not rambling any longer, I think to me that's probably why the 80s has had that and why it's been so unique. That's not to say that it won't happen again, but I think that the 90s transitioned nicely into the 2000s. I think that the music didn't suddenly become a stark jump towards alternative rock and roll, which was like the really big addition to the 90s. Not like it hadn't been around, but that's where the shift took place, and that's basically what dominated. But I think the world today looks still a lot like the 90s did. I think that a lot of it is indistinguishable. I look around and other than new models of cars, everything is the same. But the 80s had something else different about it that we just left behind, making it ripe for.
It wasn't particularly more fashion-wise or anything. Denim is still very popular now.
Oh, yeah. No, Levi's aren't going anywhere.
More just technology.
Yeah.
Anyway, next question. All right. So you were born in 1982, was it?
Yes, that's right. February of 1982.
So you were born 1 year prior to the video game crash. So you were just at the peak of like a lot of indie game developers, you were growing up with the rebirth of the home console.
Yes, I grew up. The NES wasn't out yet, I believe, not in the United States.
85.
Yeah, and I
84.
first played it when I was 5 years old, so it was already out for about a year and a half, 2 years, I think, before I finally played it. And I got my first one when I was 7. On my 7th birthday, I remember that specifically. So that would have been 1987 was my first real console. My father owned an Atari. What are they called? The 2600.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, he
So
owned one of those, the
classics
cartridge
as
one
well.
with like, you watch these movies like Ready Player One based on the book. I've watched and read both of them now, and they don't really do it for me. But I do appreciate the adherence to some of the old school stuff. And just seeing the game Adventure come up, I have very strong memories of that game. I have never forgotten it. I'll send you a picture I found that I did for a Newgrounds art contest in like 2007 or 6 or something. And it's my contribution was a little square guy holding a sword but backwards because it looks like an arrow when you hold it backwards in Adventure, fighting this like duck dragon thing, but it's all like the high def reboot like style contest.
Wow.
I don't know. I loved that shit, and I grew up with that. And long before the Nintendo, I was playing Space Invaders and Pong and battling my brother with a tank and skydiving and playing Defender with the smart bombs. And I don't know. I was one of those kids. I grew up with that, so it was already part of me long before the push towards real graphics and the roller coaster, or actually let's say the landslide that the video game industry became had actually started to happen.
Well, okay. So you had an Atari previously. Did you have any kind of home personal computer or something?
We had one for just for word processing. We had some kind of very simple like spreadsheet style like text thing, right, which I used for school assignments. But to be fair, and I get my timelines crossed because so much of this like evolved so quickly and it's hard to say what happened when. But I do remember when I was in elementary school and I would have been like 7 or 8. I was for school assignments writing really like simple papers, at least by 3rd grade. And I would have been, 3rd grade. That's when I met your queen, Sean. I shook Queen Elizabeth's hand. Did you know that? I tell that to anybody who will listen. I was in 3rd grade, and when she was touring the United States and started in Miami, was going up the East Coast. And for some reason, my school and a couple others were selected from like my grade. I don't know why. And I got to go to this old park called Vizcaya out of Miami, built from I think a Spanish fort that this wealthy guy had shipped stone by stone back from Spain to Miami to like rebuild it. And something like that. I'm probably misrepresenting it, but that's something like that. And yeah, Queen Elizabeth was there, and we got to meet her and shake her hand. I was on the news because I thought she made at least $1 million a year. They interviewed us.
Well, she certainly does make at least $1 million a year.
Yeah. That's all I really wanted to talk about, all this 80s stuff. I just wanted to actually talk about that.
Well, that's fine. But I did want to ask about the growing up with the video games. Do you think that had any effect on you as a game designer / programmer?
What, the games from back then, if they had any influence on me?
Yeah.
Sean, I would tell you that they're the entire reason I am the person I am. Regardless of whether or not I'm any good at what I do, and that remains to be seen because Crinkles, a.k.a. Matt Jolly, and I are still working on our current game. I mean,
I'll get into the game stuff a little bit later, but I do...
necessarily, but
no, it's fine.
But all that is to say that I'm unproven in games. I've done some Flash games with I would say success that is amazing relative to what the media is. Project Nexus 1, like 15
million players is pretty successful.
What's that?
15 million plays is pretty successful.
I would say so. That's just 15 plays on Newgrounds. That's not even considering or accumulating the plays for every hacked version of the game on any website. I still have my Google Analytics set to look for instances of the words Project Nexus 2 anywhere on the internet as they appear. And while that rarely happens because we're not doing a big PR push right now, every 2 days, I get a huge list of references to Project Nexus 1 where it's been uploaded to new pirated websites. And we don't care. We're fine. We never made it for the money, and which is good because why would you make a Flash game for the money? That doesn't compute. But I mean, Sean, all that is to say that Project Nexus 1 did well, but it did well for a Flash game. 15 million plays for a game that you get for free on a browser. That's accessible and it's cheap, but it's not a success story. We're not in it for the money, but it's just not the same as making a real game, and that's what we're doing now. But yeah, Sean, I mean, the short answer to that question, I am the person I am because I grew up with video games. It's hard for me to imagine somebody growing up with an Atari and with an NES and not getting into the same like field that I am, or at least not being driven to do it. and and then life happens, and whatever you do with your life is what you do. I was lucky enough to have opportunities to do this, to be able to hook up with Matt, with Crinkles, and start working on this game where we could use his awesome success with his cartoon to find a way to finally prove ourselves.
That is a future question, so I want to get into that a little bit later. About
okay, yeah, I'm trying to phrase it in context of the question you asked, but yeah, you're right. Fine. You're right. Well, we'll get to that.
So you define yourself as a programmer, a game designer. At what point did you transition from young Michael Swain into an animator, and what was the first animation that got you into that field of creativity?
I first used Flash. I was aware that Flash existed when I was in high school. Was Flash your first introduction to animation? I'm going to say yes, it was, but I didn't personally use it. I didn't use it for that. In high school, I was taking a computer course. It was just one of those mandatory electives. Like you have like 3 things you can choose from. Art was. I went to an art high school, so that wasn't an elective. We basically had like 2 art classes a day, and so one of my electives was computer, and we had like 2 other things to choose from, and so I went for that. And I remember them teaching us the very first version of Flash. It was like. Yeah, it was like Flash.
So this was Macromedia Flash.
Yeah, easily. Even when I started working in Flash in 2006 to start animating for real, like I wouldn't say professionally, but with interest, with serious focus. Even then, it was still Macromedia. Adobe didn't buy it until I'll get this wrong. It was like 2008, maybe something like that. It was in that neighborhood.
2006, 7. I think
it may have been 7 or 8. I don't know if it was 6 because I that's when I first started animating. That was my first full year of animating Blockhead, so it might have been 2007. But if it's 6, I wouldn't be surprised. Anyway, that's not really important. I was basically learning to do 3D rendering and modeling in 3D Studio Max, which existed back then, as well as it wasn't 3ds Max. It was actually Strata Studio Pro and Maya, which existed back then too, I think. But yeah, I eventually my real first adventure into 3D animation was doing a little bit of 3D modeling and animation for a game mod community for a game called Freedom Force, where it's not turn-based, but it's like a real-time over the top down, like over top city fighting superhero battling video game. And Freedom Force was awesome. It was so awesome, in fact, that one of the songs from the sequel, Freedom Force versus the Third Reich, became a song I used for all of my Mastermind cartoons in the background. Which is, of course, why I never monetized those, because I was using basically copywritten stuff. So free of charge, you're welcome. But I liked that game enough that I wanted to start putting together new animations of characters fighting, because you could mod the game and upload your own models and animations. So I learned 3D Studio Max. And that for me was like my big first attempt at doing anything.
So what kind of year are we talking about at this point?
This was between 2001 and 2003. I can't quite place it. I'm not sure when I picked it up. Okay. But actually, no, you know what? It was 2001. Summer of 2001, I went to London on a trip I paid for with my own money from an internship. And I remember I was doing the 3D modeling back then as well. So yeah, about 2001 I started.
What was your internship?
I worked at an architectural firm, not doing any kind of architecture. It was just a gopher job, but for those who don't know, that means you basically go for coffee, you go for paper, you go for whatever people tell you to go get. I was an office slave, basically. And that was fine because it's paid slavery, so it's not really slavery. It's more like a job, I think they call it. So I don't know, I did that, and me and this other guy I knew, we both had this job. My mother had gotten it for me because she knew the guy who owned the company. And I don't know, I was looking for spending cash, and I worked there for about 4 or 5 months. It was the only real job I've ever actually had in my entire life, was that, and I made copies for people.
Oh, how fortunate!
Yeah.
Okay, so you've talked about your introduction to animation. Yeah. So how does that transition into you discovering Newgrounds, and what was your introduction to that?
Let me see. All right, so Newgrounds was actually Salad Fingers, plain and simple. I was playing video games at the time, like at a buddy of mine's house who had set up like a nice LAN room. He had like 6 really awesome well-end computers. His was always the best, but the other ones were still better than anything I had at home. And so we'd get together and play StarCraft or single-player games like Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, I think it was called. Yeah, Bloodlines. We'd come together, play that, Command and Conquer games, freaking Warhammer 40K. And sometimes tabletop, just like pen and pencil games, like World of Darkness games. And one day, among watching clips of C Lab 2021, my friend says, "Hey, you got to check this out. It's really weird. I don't want to tell you anything about it." And so he showed us, and it was the first 2 episodes of Salad Fingers. The other ones hadn't come out yet. So you'll be able to place the time period based on that. And from that, I remember looking at it and thinking to myself, I could do that. It's like, now I can't. I didn't think for a second I could do what Firth does. Not even close. The guy is fucking unique. Can I say fucking? He's fucking unique. Truly. And sure. I didn't think I'd be able to imitate his style or the personality, but I looked at the art and I thought, that's accessible to me. I can get on my mouse and start doodling and it'll look really good. Like, I can at least make something look like this, like based on like Salad Fingers.
You want an optical mouse at that point?
What's that?
You want an optical mouse at that point?
No, well, I had one. Is my computer?
You're using like a ball mouse or something.
Yeah, sorry, my computer is trying to put itself to sleep for some reason. I don't know why. I didn't let it. I did not let it. You're just talking. I did, but I did some research and I looked at the tutorials on Flash online that I could find. And I mean, long story short here, I saw the Newgrounds watermark on Salad Fingers and clicked over. And we'll get to that. But no, but to answer the mouse question, I actually immediately went online and looked for a Graphire tablet. That's a Wacom tablet, but now they call it the Bamboo. That or it was replaced by the Bamboo. At the time, we had the Graphire. I'm not even sure if Intuos was out. I'm sure it was though, but I'm not actually sure. So I say that.
So you were that confident? You just
I picked up a $30 Graphire tablet from Best Buy or Target or something, Walmart, and came home and started doodling with it. And my first Blockhead cartoon took me exactly 11 hours from the moment I sat down and wrote the script to the moment I've published to Newgrounds. 11 hours. That was it.
Now, speaking of Blockhead, obviously we can go on your website and you've written a whole. Well, a brief history of where Blockhead came from. Could you give us
what does it say? It says I'm 26 years old. Yeah, I wrote that I wrote that
years.
before the last time I updated to say I was 26. So I probably wrote that about 12 years ago.
So to those who are too lazy to go on your website and don't know what Blockhead is, where did that whole character start?
All right, so Blockhead did not start on Newgrounds. And I mean, Newgrounds, to be fair, I'd actually heard of it in 2000 when it was a bunch of assassin games. And a friend of mine had sent me there. So you gotta look at this website. And I looked, and it was all of, I don't know who Tom Fulp was. The name didn't even come up for me. But I played his games. Some of them were GIF oriented and whatever. I'd played it. I exhausted everything on the site, and I moved on with my life and didn't hear about it again for years. But Blockhead actually even predates that. It was a doodle I did when I was end of 5th grade. So 12, something like that. It was a drawing that I did in response to this kid drew this we were just doodling in class, and this kid drew a dinosaur. It was like a brontosaurus or a long-necked dinosaur, and everything was there, like the elephant feet and the big long tail and the long neck. But at the end of the neck was a smiley face, just a circle with a happy face. And I thought, oh, that's what is he trying to be funny? And I looked at him, and this kid was dead serious. That's what he thought a dinosaur would look like, or at least that was the transition from I know what a dinosaur looks like to this is the best I can do to represent it. No long mouth, no teeth, no nothing, just little slashes for eyes and a smiley face on a circle head. And I have a thing, maybe this is what sets me apart or sets creative types apart. I don't mean skilled creatives, I just mean people who want to make stuff regardless of whether or not they're good at it. But I think that creative types see something they enjoy and they have to participate in it. Whether it's fan fiction or fan art, or it's you're watching a TV show or a movie and you like it and you can't help but talk out loud about what you're experiencing because it's that important to you at that moment that you have to somehow integrate yourself into it or it into your life. And I did that with that dinosaur picture. I thought that is so amazing. I've never seen anything like this in my fucking life. And I need to do something with that. So I kind of created this entire personality around this idiot dinosaur thing. But I dropped the dinosaur and ended up just doing this character where what if the rest of him was all blocks and shapes and looked just as absurd. And yeah, the character Blockhead was created right away. And I have no doubt that the word Blockhead came to me because of Gumby, the 2 little block villains in there. Except they were called Blockheads because their heads are literally blocks. My Blockhead is called Blockhead because he's an idiot. In case you didn't know. So yeah, that's the long and short of Blockhead. That's where he came from. 5th grade. If I was 12, that would have been 1994, I guess. 1992, 1993. I was 82. Yeah, 82 was born. 12 years after that. So 84.
It's all right.
There you go.
I wasn't born yet, so.
Mm-hmm. So there was a lot happening back then, Sean. You wouldn't have understood.
Let's see.
So yeah, that's the history of Blockhead. I brought him back in high school when I was 18. It's hard to imagine going from 12 to 18 and feeling like that had been forever. 6 years now is like nothing. But I brought him back to show some friends of mine who didn't understand what these little comics I had drawn were when I was talking about them. I'd lost them. I found them eventually, but I'd lost a bunch of them. And so I just started doodling some stuff in high school. And a lot of the crap that you might recognize from the Blockhead cartoon I eventually did in 2006 on Newgrounds, again, another 6 years, I was pulling from some source material from the comics I'd drawn in high school. And I think most of them are up on my website now. I think they're accessible
I think you released one of the really old ones that didn't make the cut or something.
Yeah,
in 2012
right. Yeah, there were
some
that were just sort of idiotic, and I mean like from a writing perspective, not from a character perspective.
Let's see. So I did some digging because I was like, what could I ask Michael Swain about to be deep and
You want to be edgy?
deep and questionable? So I did some digging on your Newgrounds and I found a post from March 20th, 2008. To summarize the post, I'll just read the first quotation.
Is this from the forums?
This is from your Newgrounds. March 20th, 2008, quote, "Today I wanted to get some feedback from you guys on a few topics, namely my present and future approach to cartoons. I've always made a point to read the reviews of my audience, leaving me for inspiration, motivation, and direction on my projects. But with my toons being released more slowly as I learn to up their quality, I get that user advice less and less often." What I wanted to ask, it's quite a wordy post because you talk specifically about Blockhead and Mastermind.
That
and
was
things.
wordy. Have you heard me talk?
Well,
you're lucky to get it in written form where I can go back and make it more concise for you. But yeah, I do remember that actually. I remember that being an issue was the fact that you learn how to turn time. I think that's one of the big skills of not of any artist and anything, cooking to music to whatever, is being able to take time and convert that into quality. And
basically, to summarize the post, you're asking for feedback and opinions on the way you're leaning your newer Blockhead episodes and things into. For example, you ask if they prefer cartoons where Blockhead just sits on a couch instead of ones where he leaves the house, for example. This may lead into the next question, but how important is it for you that the community watching these videos either has a say or express as much of a critical analysis of your work as possible?
That's I normally hate when people say, "Boy, that's a really good question" on interviews, because I always feel like that's just them buying time. But no, I think this is probably my.
I'll tell you what.
Yeah, I know. I really like the question.
It's all downhill from here. That's the best question in this entire.
Okay. Well, they were all winners up until this point, right? Well, it's okay. So, this is kind of a conundrum, Sean, and I hope you'll take this as my answer or part of my answer. Okay, so let's say that you got a very popular show like Harmon and Roiland's Rick and Morty, right? That's a great example because it blew up like overnight, and everybody loves it. And even though the fans are typically kind of, it's easy to cringe over the fans. A lot of them. The show itself is still spectacular. Whether or not you agree with that, the mass majority of folks who have seen it have come to enjoy it. It's whatever the case, it's integrated into popular culture. All this is to say that imagine that for the next season, Harmon and Roiland decide that they can leverage this show to make more money, let's say that they want to leverage the show to make more money, to do so by changing the format of the show in a way that makes more people like it. And for me, the conundrum in something like this, and I'm not accusing these guys of doing anything. I'm using them as an example.
Yeah.
Would it be viable for them to change the nature of the show, not evolve it naturally, but to make a decision to change the show in such a way that alienates 20% of their viewership, arbitrarily, I'm just coming up with a number, 20% of their viewership, in order to increase it 100% from what it was before? So let's say they had 10 people watching the show, 2 people drop out, but now they have 20 more people pop on board for a total of like 28 people watching now. Is that viable? Like that, like quantity, because it's not a quantity versus quality issue. Because the content could still be awesome. It could be spectacular. But how important is it to, like, is there such a thing as some people's opinions being more important than others? And by losing 2 people, is it worth gaining 10?
I think there's a difference here, right?
What's that?
Would there not be a difference between a network television show needing to get specific figures versus an animation that's free online?
Well, yeah, if you're answerable to somebody, then yes, you've got to make your numbers. But
so my question is,
let's say that they're already doing that. Let's say that just like most questions, what would you do with your life if money wasn't an issue? Let's say in that case, money wasn't an issue.
My point being, were you making these animations for yourself or for your viewers?
For myself, but I think that by sharing them, it's not enough to create it and not release it.
So you feel like
it's not the numbers. I mean, the numbers
gained
are
over time.
It's
you had an almost obligation to listen to your own audience, as opposed to just being as creatively free as possible. So to speak.
I'm not answerable to anybody. That is to say, I'm not. When I work on something, when me and Matt release Madness eventually, whenever that happens, we're not really answerable to anybody. We will deliver the game that we said we would, but will people enjoy it? Who's to say? What matters for us is that we make the game that we want. But let's say that we spent the last 2, 3, let's not be so optimistic, 4 or 5 years working on this game and then released it so that 20 people could play it. Something would feel off about that. Not because we're not going to make our money back or the time that we should have spent working real jobs and getting paid for it, for our livelihood. Not because of that, but there's something wrong about that. And I don't know what it is. And I think that creative content needs to breathe in the open. I think, and it's my opinion, that if you create something, if you doodle something in your notebook and nobody sees it, that's like a personal thing between you and your notebook. That's pretty much just a figment of your imagination. But when I go and I create something like Blockhead, and suddenly I've got, on my first cartoon, like 300 or 400 views. And I remember when my first cartoon uploaded to Newgrounds, I had 300 or 400 views. I thought to myself, I can't believe that if even half of them actually clicked it and watched it all the way through, I can't believe that even over 100 people just watched my cartoon. That's more people than have ever looked at all of my comics of Blockhead that I'd ever created combined. And that was amazing to me. And something about that made it real. And when I say that artistic media needs to breathe, I mean that once you've released it, it becomes a part of other people's lives, just like the friends that you have in the real world. Unless you believe in the simulation theory that you're the only protagonist in your world, and when anybody walks out of your line of sight, they cease to exist. Unless you believe in that, you do believe that people continue to exist around you and away from you. And when I'm not working on a cartoon or when I wasn't working on Blockhead, I could know that Blockhead was out there still existing. And that gave him such agency and made it such a real thing that I was completely hooked. I think I was always driven to do this anyway, but I was completely hooked from then on, and I couldn't separate from it. And anytime I did anything creative or artistic, whether or not I thought it was worthwhile, I had to share it. I had an idea for Mastermind that I talked with an old buddy of mine, Jake. We used to know him as Anagen, but Jake, I'm always fucking up his last name, Gans or Gans. He's a fella, he works for... he basically like a super animation studio, like one-man studio. And I met him when he was like this young guy at a convention helping out with the Newgrounds booth like I was. But I was talking to him back before either one of us was worth fucking anything. And we were just talking about this like concept of a bumbling supervillain idiot. And I loved it so much, I had to make it. I had to create it. So I formed this cartoon out of it. And that was the birth of Mastermind. And it wasn't enough to just talk about the idea with Jake. It was something that I had to produce it. I had to make it real by manifesting it and then putting it on Newgrounds, which of course to me has always been the biggest benefit of Newgrounds as a medium. But anyway, that to me is why I think people who feel the need to just create what other people want, that's just commission work, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think that you need to do what you've got to do to get it out there, to give and to sacrifice to give your content or your original piece agency. And to me, you do that by listening to what people are interested in, to tell them the parts of the story that are important to them. That's not to say that Blockhead would change as a character based on the demands of people. I would never do that. But would I, for example, show them the parts of his life that are more interesting to them, I think I would, yeah. And I think that's mostly what I was trying to get at when I asked that question. So there you go, Sean. That when I say that was a good question, I want you to know I've been dealing with this and pondering over this, what sacrifices are okay to be made for the content conundrum for a long
Swain,
time.
How would you feel if I said this is a two-part question?
I would say, all right, go. I'm ready.
On August 21st, 2007, which is 7 months prior, you made another post I found kind of interesting. I'm going to just read this to you. I might edit this out in post if it's really boring or whatever. But, okay. The title of the post is called Woe is Swain. Hi guys, I love you. Okay, so I recently said to someone that it feels to me like I want the world. I want to get paid for doing what I do now with my free time, animate. Is that fair? I feel like a jackass for even assuming it. I could easily get paid for doing work in Flash in general, which is, well, what I do now. But what I create isn't interesting to me. It's all web design stuff. It's not my own work, or at least it won't be mine when I've finished with it. I mean, I animate for you suckers, but I do it because I want to entertain others. So it's not that selfish of me to try and steer myself in that direction, right? Or should I stop whining to myself, to others, and to my poor mama and papa Swain, who are sick of my belly aching, and just get a job? But then what happens when I can only animate a new cartoon once every 5 months? At the bottom you say, oh, I miss the freedom of my scholastic... Scholastic? I didn't know that was a word. I miss the freedom of my scholastic days. Kids, if you're going to college now and have even the littlest time to animate, then use it. No, now. Don't make me come over there. Blah, 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 blah. Under the presumption you're referring to Blockhead here, how often during your animation career did you feel an almost obligation to continue a series despite not personally feeling much passion for it, since unless you're talking about your interests swaying more towards kind of web design and programming at this time?
Right. Well, what was the date on that? I'm sure it's timestamped.
It was August 21st, 2007.
2007, okay.
Before the last one.
Yeah, 2007 was like my heyday for yeah, that was my heyday for animation. Because I joined in 2005. I made my chops in 2006. I started to veer towards learning techniques instead of making it up as I go, watching the great ones like, Johnny Utah and what they were producing in order to try to like steer my own artistic career, seeing like the artwork of like Mind Chamber, for example, which was blowing me away at the time. I couldn't believe you could do that stuff with Flash. So I think that at the time, yeah, I was starting to notice that by learning those techniques, when I say that quality comes at the expense of time, that's what skill is with art, is learning how to, with any art, is taking time and converting that into quality. I was learning that it was almost a bottomless pit. There was almost no limit to how much time you could put into something to make it just slightly better, and to decide where to cut that off. And I was starting to understand that in a lot of ways I wasn't willing to do that. To make those sacrifices. I wanted to produce quality. I wanted to be Adam Phillips level of animator awesome. And it was, it was a tough choice, because I prefaced all this by saying that the first Blockhead cartoon took me 11 hours to produce. And I mean all of it. And then I'm also including inventing the voices for the characters, which I didn't even have at the time. But by the last Blockhead cartoon, I spent 30 days working on it at about 4 or 5 hours a day. Like almost a full job, including weekends. And I was killing my back. I was lurching over my Cintiq tablet. I'd upped my skill. I'd upped my hardware. I was working with new tools, and it was, it hadn't been that long in like 2008 or 9 or whenever I animated that one, the last Blockhead, to date. It hadn't been that long since I'd made the first one, relatively speaking, and I could still remember how easy it was to just do that. But then, of course, I would go back and watch the first Blockhead, and I could barely get through it because it's so hard to see now, knowing what I can do and I'm capable of. But also, that's the thing, isn't it? If I had the skill to do Blockhead as well in the beginning as I did towards the end, then would I be as nostalgic about it? Just like all this 80s talk, would I really have had such fond memories of this thing that I could just shit out in no time at all and be happy with it at the time? So I don't know, dude. I know that I wasn't looking forward to doing web design. I wasn't looking forward to programming. I didn't want to have to do any of that stuff. Web design would have been a painful necessity just to pay the bills. Programming eventually I would get into because that's necessary in order to make games if you want to make them for yourself. So I taught myself. I had some background with it already, but not what was required to actually make games in Flash and eventually in C# to make Unity games like I'm doing now. So yeah, dude, it was rough, and I remember that. It kind of makes me sad to hear that again. That little news post.
Well, I'm glad I made you sad today.
But I mean, it's nostalgically sad, like the opposite, like remorseful of times gone. But I found my way out, Sean. I found the loophole. You stop animating altogether, and you don't have to fucking worry about it.
That's all right. We'll get onto that later.
Yeah, that's the only way out.
You talked about your peak year. I think what was interesting is the year of 2008. It's kind of your expansion for different animations away from Blockhead and more into the Mastermind series.
And that was tough.
Which could be argued as your second claim to fame. Would that be a fair comment to make?
It's yes, in that relative to Blockhead, it would be my second claim to fame. Relative to, say Ego Raptor or any of the other big guys on Newgrounds who have staked their careers on it, I would say no. I would not use the word fame, but yeah, I did pretty well with it. All things
notoriety, maybe.
Okay, yeah.
Where did your inspiration for Mastermind come from, and was there any level of fear that your founded Blockhead fanbase would possibly reject these new ideas and just want more of the same cartoon?
To answer the second part first, yeah, I couldn't sleep that night. I was excited because I'd released something that I was actually really proud of. It felt wonderful to make something new, and I mean really new, not just a new Blockhead cartoon, but a brand new concept with something that was invented by me, completely by me. And yeah, I mentioned I was making jokes with like Jake on the phone about stuff. We were like, some of the like the cock slap joke was like his or something, I think. But the idea was mine, and I'd approached him with it, and I just wanted to talk about it. And yeah, I was so excited, but I was also so nervous that I got on, because we were still using Instant Messenger at the time. I got an Instant Messenger, and like I sent a message to Tom saying, "Hey, I uploaded Fulp, that is to say." Hey, I uploaded something new. I'm really scared. I think I'm going to alienate all of my existing fans. I think anybody who likes Blockhead is going to hate me from now on. He's like, why? What did you do? I'm not at the office right now. I can't check, but what's going on? It was like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I was basically just like blubbering at Tom Fulp because I was afraid that I was going to lose my little fans. Yeah, it was pathetic, but it meant something to me. I didn't want people to think that I was doing something against them, like haha, this whole time I was just setting you guys up to let you know I'm a lecherous old piece of shit releasing a cartoon about a pair of tits with legs. That's what the whole thing is about. Yeah, I was really anxious, but the concept itself, I think I'd been inspired, artistically I was inspired by the Venture Brothers a lot at the time. They had not started the 3rd season yet, I believe, when I first came up with Mastermind. So it was still just this like kind of cult thing in the background that was getting a lot of post-cancellation popularity back. And I was part of that like new wave. So I was inspired by the art style. I've always liked the worlds of like James Bond villains as well as like superhero villains. I had also, like I mentioned, been playing the Freedom Force game. I had that deep seated in my head. It had been years since I'd played it at that point, but I don't know. I've always liked that culture of superheroes, and fair to say, it says it somewhere on my website, but I had an idea for a superhero cartoon, which was actually the whole reason I got into Flash in the first place. It wasn't to make a Blockhead cartoon. Blockhead was just practice so that I could eventually make a cartoon world about these superheroes that nobody would care about. It wasn't very well thought out, but I was driven to it, and I never did it. But I think Mastermind was like my only step ever in that direction. I think that was, that's basically it. That's where it came from.
I mean, from the year of 2008, you made a bunch of other... I'm talking from 2008 to 2013, 14. You experimented a lot in terms of these animated shorts, mostly lending your voice. What was your kind of thought process into lending more of a voice actor role as opposed to an animator?
You mean to like other people's work, like admin craft?
Exactly.
That one, well, that was fun because that was never my project. If Tomar or Jaxie asked me for an opinion on something, I'd give it. But other than that, I didn't really have any input on the creative process. I was basically asked, well, that's not entirely fair. Like all of the shitty grief play stuff that my character does in the segments in Admin Craft actually happened. I actually was trolling people that were coming onto Tomar's server, and when asked why he didn't just ban me, somebody asked him that. He said he didn't want to stifle creativity. So he was enabling me, basically. And so, I mean, other than me being the source material, I was given carte blanche to speak it the way that I would best want to speak it. But yeah, other than that, I don't know. That was mostly just me helping because I liked the content, and those segments were about me playing the game, and I found that really endearing. So I wanted to help any way I could. Besides, who can do me better than me, right?
Michael, in 2011, you uploaded only one animation, and that was the Blockhead short called Tongs, and that was the original episode 1, quote unquote, series back in 2003.
Yeah.
I'm curious to ask, what was your full-time income or job during this entire year?
College student, that was it.
Just college student.
College student, yeah. I was
on. You're still a college student. Is that
I
why
was on a scholarship, so I didn't have any tuition payments or loans or anything like that. I was on a Florida scholarship that took care of 90 to 95% of my tuition fees, which is basically just cost of living. So I lived out of my my savings fund that my grandparents had put together for me for college one day. And it was nice because it's not like it was a huge amount of money. It was enough to pay for some classes. But because the scholarship was pretty much doing that, I was able to use that for room and board, basically. But that segment, the Tong segment, was something I had done. It wasn't actually about Blockhead, as I'm sure you could see. He was just sort of there. He didn't even have a voice at the time. You've probably noticed. That was just something I'd thrown in as a kind of whatever. And it was supposed to be using media for a digital media course I was taking, and producing a commercial using I forget what they were now, but producing a commercial using 3 bullet points from this list of subjects to try to use. And one of them was comedy. I tried my hardest to be funny with it by being absurdist, but that's all that was. That was just a homework assignment that I had really gone overboard with. And I passed, but it was a course where you have to be trying. It's like burning boiling water. It's you can't do it. You couldn't fail this course. But that's what that was. And Blockhead made a little sneak appearance in that, but that was really it.
Of course, that was the only animation in 2011 because you uploaded 2 games that year, one being Skincraft and the other being Madness Ambulation.
Yeah.
Let's go into Skincraft first. Where did this idea actually come from, and was it just your own tool?
Yeah, that was that was the main source of it. It was just an idea that I'd had. I was talking to, if you watch Admin Craft, the character Iggybot is a friend of ours, Erin, and she was also an admin on Tomar's server back in previous to Skincraft. I think she was still adminning at the time that we'd made that game. And I was talking to her on Skype, or probably again Instant Messenger, let's be honest, about how we should have uniforms for our admin characters on the server, but that none of us were really willing to get rid of our existing ones. I had a Blockhead skin I'd made, and she had some robot type character. And I thought, wouldn't it be neat if if I had a Photoshop document with layers already built into it, and all you had to do is copy paste your avatar into it, and then turn on the pieces that you want. So it would be like your character now has a badge on their chest, or is wearing a vest, or is wearing a cool hat, or something that you could basically put your skin that you already have into Photoshop with, and just turn on the layers that you think apply to you, and then use sliders to change the colors or whatever. And then I thought to myself, actually, it'd be really easy to do something like that in Flash. And I said, all right, hold on a second. And I went and I talked to my buddy Sean, Afro Ninja. And this is our first real project we'd worked on together, I believe. And I guess last, we did the Newgrounds Office adventure, but that was a whatever thing as a joke.
Was Afro Ninja the one you worked with for that questionably racist game? Or was that someone else?
Oh, CCB? No, that was Johnny Utah.
No, what was it? Is it CCB?
Yeah, CCB. Yeah, it's on Newgrounds. You'll see it there. You'll find it. You mean the one about the Japanese game show?
Yeah, okay.
But but for some reason, yeah. Okay. Well, that one was Johnny Utah. He did the art and I did the programming for this. Skincraft, on the other hand, was the other way around. that was me doing the art. Sean did the programming, and we just decided let's just do it. Let's just make something like this, and we decided to put it together, monetize it with a Newgrounds API advertisement that only happens when you save your file, never when you're playing or using it. You don't have to wait with an ad at the beginning before you use the project. And even then, you only have to watch the ad once, and then you can make and save as many as you like. But yeah, that was just an impulse thing, and it actually ended up being at the time the most popular Minecraft skin creator in the world for a limited time. But it was. We got some help from Mike Welsh from Newgrounds. Now he works for Behemoth. He just helped them with their last game, Pit People. That is either releasing now or just has. I forget.
I think it's been out for a little bit.
It might have been. They've been doing beta for a while, so I lose track. But yeah, he helped us with the little 3D model of the character. He put together a piece of code for us that, in Flash, produces a 3D character, which is awesome. The guy's a freaking madman genius. But yeah, that was Skincraft. That's where that came from. Was just an idea that and they say that's where inventions sometimes are best spawned from, is out of some strange necessity, and nobody else has thought to do it yet. So we thought, let's make a Photoshop document simulator, and we did, and we called it Skincraft.
Of course, this is a podcast mainly about Madness creators, so it's finally time to get into the meat of the episode everyone's been probably waiting for.
Yeah, Project Nexus.
Let's discuss Madness Ambulation first.
Ambulation, yeah.
How did this project start? Because presumably you had met Matt previously. Had he had any discussion about this project first?
Yeah, we met in 2007. I think that's when the first Comic-Con was that I'd gone to. And I sat at a table, after the same Afro Ninja I just talked about. Sean was the very first Newgrounder I met. Jake, the one that I talked to on the phone with over Mastermind way back, and Lewis from Newgrounds, who I've lived with 2 out of 3 of those guys at some point in my life. We all met up in San Diego. Yeah, I was gonna say San Diego for Comic-Con, where I met a ton of people from Newgrounds. I met Brad Bourne, Dr. Nero CF, that does the Fancy Pants Adventures series. And he's freaking awesome as a human and as a programmer and game designer. I met Afro Ninja, and for whatever reason, when Tom sat everybody down at the table for dinner, we went to this restaurant. He sat me next to Crinkles, and I don't know why. That just specifically, he just had me sitting next to Matt. And I had never met him before, but I knew what Madness was. I'd already played Madness Interactive a shit ton of times. I've always thought it was a cool little system for a game. But yeah, Tom sat me next to Crinkles, and we just started talking. He justifiably had never heard of anything I'd ever done, because other than his own content, I think he knew Arfenhouse, and that was it. He was a Newgrounds fan, but he was a deep Newgrounds fan. I was a newcomer at the time, so my stuff was not really up there yet. But yeah, I don't know. I was sat next to Matt. I'd already met him at that time, and yeah, when I started working on Madness Ambulation with that same guy, Lewis Castanon, who, for context, was the guy who was basically responsible for every Newgrounds meetup. He arranged all of it. He was the guy who set up the events. If it was London or New York or Philadelphia or San Diego, it didn't matter. Lewis was always the guy. He and I decided to make a Madness Day cartoon, but decided to go for a game instead. And we came up with Madness Ambulation, where you simulate a scene from one of Crinkles' Madness cartoons by jumping on the hood of a car and shooting at bad guys as they drive by you. And that was it. It was a fast little game. I think it took us about a week to make. And that was it.
Well, quickly after that, because I don't have the exact dates, but literally the next year you're starting, you uploaded Madness Project Nexus.
Yeah. That was about the time that Matt and I started to chit-chat a lot.
Where did this project come from? Because I recall you had met up with Matt.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I wrote that. You met up with Matt in, I thought it was Pico Day, but obviously it was Comic-Con.
Yeah,
could you tell us when you and Matt first had this discussion for this Madness game?
Well, we'd started to become buddies at a New York meetup, and after that, he and I were talking on, I guess, Skype or Instant Messenger. We were talking on one of those things fairly often, and it was mostly just griping about art stuff. He was trying to transition not out of Madness, but out of being exclusively that style. That was about the time that he'd already released the Project IV cartoon of his. And he was just he was very dissatisfied with his frame-by-frame animation because he'd never really done it before freehand. Because, a lot of people think that he animates his Madness cartoons with tweens. He doesn't.
That's the meme.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, he and I would trade advice because I was trying to hone my art game. I was, if you look at my old Blockheads versus my newer ones, I may not have been producing New Blockhead at that time, but I was still producing artistic content. I was working on other Mastermind cartoons previous to 2011, and I was trying to up my game. So he and I were trading stories about things we'd learned and where you can do 30-second pose drawings online for quick practice. And I don't know, we maintained this like artistic relationship, like hanging out online, just talking about stuff. And every now and then he would gripe to me about how he had set up something to make a Madness Xbox game with some friend of his or some dude he knew online who just completely vanished. He's like, I can't find him. He doesn't return my emails. I know he's around because he still posts to his like whatever MySpace or something. And I was griping to him, yeah, there were these guys who wanted to make a Mastermind game with me. It was a really cool idea with destructible terrain. It would be like a sort of like Smash Brothers-y type game, but more a little bit more strategic and less button mashy. And we're like griping at each other about all these little things that just weren't coming to pass. And at the time, we were also doing like a kind of pass my flash type thing with Blockhead and Hank stumbling through a Madness stage or something, where like Blockhead would like fall out of the vents and land on people, and Hank would like shoot over him. And we were just experimenting with this like cool flash thing that I have no idea where it is now. We probably animated like 15 to 20 seconds of it before we gave up. And then one day, Matt just let me know that the guy had disappeared that he was working on this game with. And this is towards the end of one year. I told him, I'm between projects. We should make a game sometime. He's like, yeah, I was thinking that. Like, you're working on games, and I find myself with free time between my Madness cartoons, and yeah, we should think about making a game. And we decided, why don't we talk about that Madness game? And for a long time, Matt, when we came up with Project Nexus 1, Matt was calling it Madness Interactive 2, until I convinced him that sounds like we're basically making a sequel to someone else's game. Madness is his content, it's his IP, but it's still interactive with someone else's game. Matt and I are two people making a game from scratch ourselves. We're not going to give credit to somebody else who's not responsible for our game. We're making something new. So we came up with Project Nexus. And that was the story of that. And it took us maybe 3 or 4 months maximum to work on. It didn't take
That was
long.
a very quick development.
Yeah, but that's
so
Flash games.
Was the creative direction set in stone almost from the beginning to have it play just like a Madness cartoon, or were you thinking something different?
That part was, for sure, because we had the advantage of being able to start with a bunch of Matt's existing assets for his Madness cartoons, which I could just then throw in and animate using code to kind of simulate it a little bit. And anybody who plays the game can tell you it does look like a Madness cartoon, and there's a very strong argument towards why that is, which is that Matt did the art, and it's also a lot of the same assets that came from his cartoon. Plus, he was the one personally animating everything, so even if it didn't feel hand animated, it was still his work. So it was still pretty much on point, I thought.
I'm actually really curious about this next question. Was there any level of worry or doubt taking on a project as big as this, with the Madness fanbase being one of the most prevalent in Newgrounds history? There must have been quite a bit of pressure on your shoulders to make the game not only enjoyable to fans of Madness, but people who may not even know what Madness is. Strangely,
dude, not even. I don't think we even cared.
Really?
I think I can say that with confidence. I don't think that ever crossed our minds. It's not like now with Project Nexus 2, where we're like constantly in touch with people over Discord, talking directly with people who've backed us over PayPal and the Kickstarter. That is because we're making a real game, and I don't want to take questions from you from the future, because I'm sure we'll get back to it, but when we talked about doing things to please fans, Project Nexus 2 is more that project. Because it's left our domain. Project Nexus 1 was our domain. It's WASD controls and a mouse with one button because it's Flash. You can't right click. You can't. So we had to make a very simple game. We were limited by what we could do with Flash, so everything else was just sort of on us to just create a Madness experience, which is how we came up with the tack bar, your like dodge shield that you get in the game. It's just because in Madness Interactive, you just get shot and die like fairly quickly. So we wanted to give you some kind of leeway. We made some executive choices like that to throw stuff in that didn't exist in Madness, but sort of did. How is it that people can shoot at Hank, but they don't seem to hit him most of the time anyway? So we kind of explained it away, and people generally accepted it. And to be honest, man, if they didn't like it, I wouldn't have even had a way to know that, because we weren't vocal with anyone. They would leave a Newgrounds review on the submission after it was done. And previous to that, I think we may have posted a screenshot once or twice ever to anyone, and then we just uploaded the game like it didn't even matter. All that mattered was that we were going to rely on Newgrounds as like, oh, here's a new submission from Crinkles and Swain. To the movie portal, because Matt mislabeled it. But yeah, other than that nonsense, we were just sort of relying on Newgrounds to either eat it up or not.
So when the game finally released, at what point did you realize that it was an overwhelming success, and a sequel was most likely going to happen.
We actually didn't know the success thing happened with a big space between then and when we thought a sequel might happen. We talked about it a lot, but we were really just going to keep making a Flash game for years if we could. That's how we found the upper limits of what you can do with Flash, and that there is a hard limit to the amount of data that can be stored in the library of your like media folder in the project itself before it just shits itself and stops working. And I do really mean like Flash is not it's not built for that. So it's excusable that it fails in that regard. You can't really blame it. You're not supposed to make games in Flash. That's not why it exists as a tool. But we tried, and it couldn't happen, and we had to close up shop on the game before it ever got as big as we wanted. And we just kind of figured that was it. That's it for Project Nexus. We did the best we could. But that's the second part. The first part of the question, like when did we realize it was a success? That's kind of hard to say. I think when it stood up over, I think it was at Pico Day, because I was already living in Philly when I'd moved to Philly from Miami at that point. I think it was at Pico Day when Project Nexus was up for Game of the Year, and I believe lost to Abobo's Big Adventure or Great Adventure. I forget how Bombtunes named it. But the Abobo game that he had created, that was this like, he ran into all the same problems we did, Flash failing on him, etc. But yeah, I mean, we lost to a game where someone had put much more work into it than we had for hours. So I think we deserved to lose. But even if, let's face it, our views are significantly higher. We have many more plays than friggin' Bobo. But to be honest, it was a better and more solid game. And he was doing this without the fan base that Matt had to bolster and push our game in the first place. So, I mean, props to him. It was an amazing endeavor, and I think he deserved to win. But the fact that we did so well competitively for a game that, not that we didn't try to put work into, but just didn't put as much work into it as other people we felt had put into theirs, it kind of cast some light on it and showed us that we had come up with something kind of special, I guess, because people seem to like it. So who am I to argue?
When you started talking about the sequel, was that also definitive that you would try and keep the style, or that it was instantly let's try and shoot for a 3D game?
Once I realized that Unity was an option, I'd seen Tom Fulp dicking around with it with Mind Chamber. A couple of years previous to that, they were trying to recreate Tom's seal clubbing game in Unity, and it looked really good. I thought it was cute. Then Tom showed me a thing he'd been working on from, again, the aforementioned Mike, who is working for Behemoth now. Mike Welsh, the guy who helped us with Skincraft. He had helped him with some code, Tom with some code, and together they'd created this little thing where like this character shape would fly around and lift and move boxes in 3D. And Tom was saying, oh, it'd be really cool if we did like a Jesus from Madness character type thing where you like telekinetically move blocks out of your way and solve physics puzzles. And he's like, I don't know, we're just diddling around with it. We're just screwing around. I don't think he said diddling. I think that's my word. And I didn't hear anything about this again for a while after Tom was like, yeah, no, Unity deleted everything in our library. Like we have all of our assets were busted, and it's not like we don't have them backed up, but we don't want to have to go through the effort of putting it back in every time Unity decides to remove everything from our folder. So I think we're just not going to use it. And then they stuck with Flash. And I remember that was stuck in my head for years before Sean, Afro Ninja, when I was living with him here in Philly, says to me that Unity's actually gotten its act together. Those aren't issues that you have anymore, and maybe you should take a look at it. So I did. And when I realized that was a possibility, I came right to Matt and said, dude, we can make a sequel. Like, we don't need... Flash was it. That's why we stopped, just because Flash was all we had. But now that Unity was a thing, we're like, dude, we could actually do this. I can already program. I've been meaning to get out of ActionScript 2, which is a language that was most popular at the time for Flash, and garbage, mind you. I thought it's an easy transition to learn C#, which is what I'm coding in now. Easy to do it. Matt, you would have to learn 3D modeling. I know some. I can help you with it, because remember, Sean, back in 2001, 2002, I was doing 3D modeling in 3ds Max. I'm like, I can help you with some of it. But I say we try. Let's put a prototype together and see what we can do. And so we did. And that's a lot of the crap that you see in the Kickstarter is in the advertisement and demo videos are our first attempts at learning how to make a real game. And we weren't it at the time. But now I would say that Matt and I are consummate professionals because of that decision we made. I finally consider myself an educated and skilled programmer. 4 years ago when we started this game, no. I didn't think it then, and I certainly don't think it now about myself then. Matt simultaneously was learning what is Blender? How do you even produce things in 3D? Now this guy is learning how to minimize draw calls by reusing materials where assets that are common in a scene are going to appear multiple times. Like our theory and concept of how to properly make a game is at a professional level finally. But anyway, yeah, here I'll just to finish the thought. Yeah, we basically that was pretty much that. We had made a decision to try out Unity, and it was an excellent decision. This is the first time that I've ever really truly considered myself a game maker, a game designer, from way back when I always wanted to do it when I played my first NES.
What were some of the creative decisions you made in terms of the look of PN2? I think stylistically speaking, at least.
Well, originally it was just meant to look like a cartoon. We wanted it to look as much like the original Project Nexus as possible. That is to say, make it look as much like Madness, the series, as possible. And after a while, I think in the beginning, I was looking for more like a Borderlands look, something gritty with a lot of cell shading. And Matt, I think, wanted to go a little bit more simple and basic, like big swaths of just plain color. It'd be easy to work on anyway, but after about 2 years, we'd slowly phased most of those old assets out of the game because they didn't look right. Matt had come to like really enjoy the gritty style with like distressed metals and industrial warehouse sheets of steel and wood that's been deteriorated, and most of that is what the game is now. But at the time, we did kind of think we were going for a much simpler style. But when we ditched the game being as like as easy a project as we thought it would be in the beginning, and veered towards, well, let's just make this a real game and spend some real years on this. About that time, we took our game up to the next level.
Obviously, we could sit here and talk about PN2 for hours on end, but that's generally what the PN2 podcast is for anyway. What I'd like to ask is a mixed in from an earlier question about your interests as an artist. Before you had that Newgrounds post where you talked about Blockhead being less favourable to web development in terms of a career and stuff.
Yeah.
At what point did you start to lose interest in animation altogether and decide to turn more towards game development and programming?
I think I can honestly say I never actually lost interest in animation. It just, the priority for animation became lower as my calling pulled me towards making games and game design. And the very first one I even really did, the first game I even screwed around with of my own creation, was actually a remaking of that board game called Mastermind, where you have to guess peg colors that the other player has picked and is hidden behind a small screen, and they give you small clues that let you know what the pegs are, but you can't find it on Newgrounds. And I disabled the link on my site because I got a cease and desist from Pressman. And legally, they didn't have any grounds to do anything about it. I wasn't breaking any kind of laws or infringing, but I decided to play ball. I didn't want to make trouble. I figured hell with it. It was just a fun experiment anyway, so I shut it down. But that after I did that game, I was pretty much hooked.
It kind of sounds like a Milton Bradley clone of Battleships, but I'm not sure where that lies.
Well, the thing is with games, the most important thing, and you guys can take this away from here, the thing about games is that you cannot copyright the rules. You can't do that. You can't copyright rules. If you want to make a game where you collect money as you go around a board, picking up cash from hotels and renting them out to people and purchasing railroads, you can do this, and the owners of Monopoly cannot do anything about it. Nothing.
Mario Party, I guess.
Well, maybe, but here's the thing. The moment that you call it Monopoly, the moment that you make a board that looks in any way like their board, that's not game rules. That's copywritten or trademarked, depending on which thing you're going for. And they can get you on that. But Pressman couldn't do jack shit about my Mastermind puzzle game because my Mastermind brand was already an established brand on Newgrounds as Mastermind, having nothing to do with their game. It was clearly advertised in the font and with the character on the splash screen and all icons of my character. And you only even know what the game is when you get into it afterwards. And the board doesn't even look the same. The way that you play the game visually is not the same at all. And on top of that, I also didn't make this for money. We just released it on Newgrounds for free. So there was no monetization, no ads or anything. So they really had nothing. They had nothing to do. But we decided to just say, hell with it, whatever. We don't want to be bad guys. We don't want anyone pissed off at us. So let's just go ahead and shut it down. Plus, on top of that, the programmer, the guy who actually made the game, I just made the art. This guy Rodrigo, who did a bunch of voice acting and music for the Mexican animation group Toonimation. Yeah, that's what they were called, Toonimation, with Paul Derford. And he lives in Mexico at the time. So I told him, like, if you want to contact this guy, he's a Mexican national. If you think you can get your money back from this guy, whatever you think that this guy owes you, feel free. But I mean, it's got nothing to do with me. So that's, yeah, whatever. But you can't copyright game rules, Sean, just letting you know.
That story kind of reminded me of the Tom Fulp's Teletubby issue.
Yeah, his was fair use. His was parody.
Yeah.
They were saying, yeah, sure, it's fair use, but you're also defaming our characters. Like, if that were true, then Zone Sama wouldn't have a career. I'm just saying. Or Shadman.
So I'm a Christian man. I don't know what you're talking about. Next question. No, I'm sure this is probably the most requested question of all time for you. So I'm just going to get it straight out of the way. What's next for Blockhead?
I'd like to make a VR game for Blockhead. I don't know how realistic it would be, but I think it'd be great to have a game where you play him and destroy things, or play his conscience and try to stop him from doing it. But I don't know. I'd made the one Blockhead game with him before, and it wasn't very good, but it was my first attempt at like, the Mastermind game was the first time I just made a game. That was the first time I did art and just sort of went along with someone else's ideas for what the game should be. The guy I worked with was Comics, spelled with a K and an X at the end, who he's actually the programmer for the first Binding of Isaac game. And he made the Blockhead game with me way back. And it was, I mean, we both put some ideas into it, but it really wasn't much of a game. It was like an experience or something. I don't know. It wasn't just like a cut and dry, let's make a game. It was kind of like, let's turn Blockhead into something else. And it wasn't very good. Neither of us knew what the hell we were doing. And whatever, shame on us. But one of the biggest faults of that game was that the fun was when Blockhead would destroy things, but that was how you lost. So it didn't make any sense. It'd be like playing Fallout so that you can watch your character get shot in the head over and over, but every time you do it, you'll lose your progress and have to start over. It just didn't compute. It wasn't good game design at all. But I think he's been in need of something different for a while. And I don't know. I'd like to reapproach Blockhead someday, but I just don't know the capacity in which I do it. I miss him. I miss working on that character. I miss writing for the annoyed conscience and finding new and colorful ways of having this begrudged and curmudgeon-y old man shout at this little happy idiot who puts pizza on his walls, and finding new ways of describing what distress that puts him into. I do. I really miss it, but I don't know. I couldn't say. I have no definitive plans for Blockhead, but I've never given up on him. It's just like I said, it's how much time are you willing to put into doing something like that and still be satisfied with the result?
You've had quite an expensive career, well, quote-unquote career, in terms of being an artist. What would you say to someone looking to get into animating in 2018 in terms of a platform, gaining a fan base, and trying to make a career out of it?
I still think Newgrounds is viable. Ever since Newgrounds started accepting videos as a format, which means you can now pause and rewind, which is so much more of an important feature than you might think at first when you're working in Flash. But it is. Being able to convert your cartoons with Swivel and then put them on Newgrounds in video format instead of Flash format, it's wonderful because it keeps Flash relevant. You still use it to produce art and you still use it to produce the animations, but the Flash file, which is at the end of the day, the worst part of Flash, is the freaking Swift format and the limitations of it. By removing that, but using Flash as a tool to produce content, I think that saved the format. It did save the format. I think doesn't matter. It did save the format. I still think that producing work in Flash, or if you've got the money, Toon Boom, which I think Adam Phillips still uses for, not even for cartooning, but for gaming, because he's producing Mighty of Brackenwood games now using it. I still think that it's a viable choice, and releasing to Newgrounds is still a viable thing to, I mean, so it's not the golden age of Newgrounds anymore. If you're starting with 0 fans and you can produce work and now you have 100 fans, Newgrounds has done something amazing for you. I still think it's relevant. I don't use it now because I'm working in Unity. If I was working in Flash, Newgrounds would still be my home, but that's just not relevant now for me.
There is Unity web player.
It does, but our game is not a Unity web game. It's 2 gigabytes big. Sorry, it's not going to happen, sadly.
I do think that Newgrounds has adapted itself into more of a artistic, critical analysis. That's not the right words. Okay. It's less of a shitpost site than it used to be.
Yeah, I agree.
Is the key I'm trying to say. In terms of animation, I'm not entirely sure because I know even on YouTube it's very difficult to get into making money out of animations.
Yeah,
or something
don't
like
expect
that,
to monetize from any of this stuff. Back in the heyday, you used to be able to say produce a piece of content that would get daily first place, and that gave you a chance to win weekly. And then that might actually give you a chance to win monthly. And if you won monthly, you got a check in the mail. And shit you not, Tom would send you freaking money. I can't remember how much it was back then. It was like $250. It was not nothing for a little bit of like extra scratch to be able to, eat lobster once a year, maybe. But it was a nice to have. It wasn't enough to make a career on. But if you then took it to the next level, you might be able to say, hey, Tom, we know that this cartoon is going to produce 500,000 to 1 million views. Can I get a sponsorship? At which point, and this is easier for guys like Ego Raptor or Crinkles to be able to do, but some small guys like me still manage to get like a small cut out of it. And Tom would say like, yeah, sure. Based on that estimate, let's assume that you're going to make this many views. I think that's worth about blah. And I'm not kidding. Sometimes it was like in the triple digits. That doesn't happen now because the APIs don't really work that way now like they used to. That was back when it was a very buyer, or I know, sorry, it was a client-friendly environment back then. Tom could really demand a lot of money out of advertisers. I know that's not the case anymore. And he was always a generous guy, still is, and he would give as well as he could to any of his members that were producing content. He would try to share the wealth. And the cutbacks are not because Tom is is withholding money in his hoards of gold in his tower all on his own. It's because he's had to downsize Newgrounds. There's like 3 or 4 permanent employees like in the office now, and they're all working on Nightmare Cops. They're not even working on the website. They're working on their new game.
It's like side projects to keep the site running.
Maybe. Well, I mean, they're going to be working on Nightmare Cops for who knows how many more years, and they've been working on it as long as we've been doing Project Nexus 2. And until they sell it, it's not making any money, so it is an investment. But in the meantime, Tom is still focused on Newgrounds. He's still spearheading it. He's representing it, and he's trying to keep it relevant best he can. But that's why I think that so long as Fulp is at the head of that ship, it doesn't matter if Newgrounds is not today what it was 7 to 10 years ago. It's still the best. I really feel it is the best way to get your work out there if it's animated. Even the art portal's fine, but I mean, I guess there's still like DeviantArt-esque websites out there that do the same thing. But nobody does what Newgrounds does. Not for animation anyway.
To close, yes. I have one final question.
My God, were we there already?
This might be a tricky one for you to remember, but this is going to be a question I'm thinking of asking every guest I have.
Sure. My mind is an iron trap, Sean. I will remember.
What is your favorite Madness fan work?
My favorite Madness fan work?
Yeah.
Let me see.
And if not, just go with Canon series or Crinkle stuff.
Okay. I think one of my favorite things in the I'll how about I answer both? The Canon one is an easy, quick question to answer. Is that moment when the auditor's blasting him with Jesus with the minigun and he's flying over the desert towards the installation to go battle him. I forget the names. I'm very bad at them and the numbers as well. But I'm sure you remember, so you'll be able to fill that in. But I loved it because Matt came to me wondering, like, hey, listen, I always draw every single shot that comes from every single bullet and every single gun as best I can. I don't know what to do. This is because, again, he created this cartoon while he and I were chit-chatting as buddies before Project Nexus 1. And he's like, I don't know what to do. I can't draw a gun that has that rate of fire, that many rounds per minute. I can't draw every single bullet. There's not enough frames in a second in Flash to be able to draw them all without drawing like 5 or 10 of them at a time. And it still doesn't look like anything. What do I do? And so I told him, just don't even draw it. Just draw the impacts. And I'm saying it's my favorite, not because I got to help Matt and just give pat him on the back about something he already knew the answer to, but because Matt was starting to change the way that he thought about what Madness needed to be. He found a way of doing, of implying in art rather than drawing. Like backgrounds are something that people freaking hate when drawing animated series, unless that's something that they're skilled at, like Adam Phillips. Unless you're just good at it, you hate having to do backgrounds just because that's a thing that your cartoon needs. So you tend to overdraw it and put too much detail, and then it distracts from the foreground, and then your eyes get lost in a blend of just like nothing. The skilled artists are the ones who know how to imply things with a background. And for Matt, he had to learn how to imply things in the foreground because he wanted to draw every fucking bullet coming from a minigun And the fact that he was able to make that transition, I was just happy to see that process happen in real time. And eventually you'll see that you do see some lines, and he's like, but I don't want to draw the bullets because, you know, in reality, like, you wouldn't see the bullets anyway. I'm like, yeah, but what about tracers? The whole point of tracers is to be able to see the bullets in a certain context. So he basically just drew the tracers, but drew more like puffs in the ground than actual bullets that you see traveling through the air. So he implied it. He found a way to justify it in the real world. Bullets you can't see, but you can see them because they're tracers, while at the same time implying the artistic, expression of a character firing a minigun at close range. I thought it was cool. It was cool watching that. And there goes my promise that this was a quick answer. But
I can't remember if you said fan work or not now.
No, I haven't said the fan one yet. That's harder because I'm not as integrated into the fan community. I kind of fast tracked, didn't I? I talked to Matt because I was a content creator. He and I became buddies because we like all of the same video games. And then eventually we just started working on a game together. So nothing I've ever made has ever been a fan thing except for Madness Ambulation, which was me and Lewis's submission for Madness Day, you know, way back. Other than that, like, I don't know. I think my favorite is probably Matt's own artwork where the characters of Madness are at the strip club. And looking at Demos's face when he's like looking up at the dancer, I lose it every time. I think it's hilarious. He looks so sweet, and it's without context. If you're not seeing the picture right now, and Sean, if you do upload this to YouTube, promise you'll like fade the picture in so that they can see it. But Demos, he looks so darling, and he looks like he's in love, but like true love, not lust, but like his heart is all a pitter or a twitter. What do the kids say? The kids don't say any of that.
Flutter?
Yeah, let's say a flutter. Yeah. I was thinking like pitter pattering, and then I said Twitter because I joined Twitter recently. But yeah, I think that's probably my favorite. Yeah, let's say. And then Chadman had one where a bunch of agents were crawling on a truck. It's like one of 3 things he's ever drawn that didn't have female body parts in it ever.
Yes, it did.
That was
there was a skylight one, and then there was one on the trucks.
Yeah,
but the trucks had a.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Anything else that Chadman has ever produced has been pornographic in nature, except for like those 2 things for some reason. That's that. And I like those just for like the artistic quality because I remember those as well. They were inspiring to me when I discovered them while we were doing the Kickstarter. They're older than that even, but that's when I first saw them.
Well, we've reached the end of our questions. Do you have any closing statements that you'd like to make? Any?
I don't know. I guess
anything you want to throw out? I guess.
I don't. Yes, I want to throw out the whole interview. Don't publish this. I think that because I don't know when you're done editing when this will be released, but I'm sure it'll be done before we're done with Project Nexus 2. Which by the time the game comes out, you may not even recognize the name. I'm sure we're going to end up just calling it Madness Project Nexus. I think we're just going to probably call it that. So whatever we call the game, Project Nexus 2, Madness Project Nexus, I hope anybody who's listening gives it a chance and checks it out just because we've put a lot of effort into the game and we'll be really sad if people don't like it. We're trying really, really hard because it's been an endeavor of love for over 4.5 years so far. So,
well, if you do change the name, you need to also get a new domain name. So that's projectnexus2.com for anyone that doesn't.
Yeah, or I should just get Madness Project Nexus. I'll have to get it before you publish this, otherwise someone else will.
Yeah.
I should probably
also need to get your company name on as well.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe I'll just go pay for like a minimum thing just to sit on the domains for now. That and Giving Tree or Jibbing Tree. I still don't even know how to pronounce my name.
If it was Gibbing, I don't know.
I say Giving Tree, but the word is actually Jibbing, so who cares?
Oh, it's a horrible name.
What's that?
It's like GIF.
Yeah, it's like, well, GIF is like GIF, Sean, just so you know.
I say GIF.
Of course
people say GIF, and I want to shoot them.
Well, it's because it's technically, I say gibbing because I mispronounced it when I was younger, and it doesn't really work as a pun on the name or play on the name Giving Tree if it's Jibbing Tree. So I want to call it Gibbing Tree. But the word is jib as in giblets. That's from original like Quake deathmatch talk. So I don't know. It's a moral quandary. I'm not sure what to do with it.
It's a tricky situation.
It is.
Anyway, Michael, I appreciate you taking time out of your day to have a conversation with me.
You got it, Sean, and I appreciate you in general.
How would you rate this interview?
What scale? I rated a 9.
The Michael Swain scale.
A 9 out of 100. Pretty good. I don't know yet. I didn't. I have to. I'll tell you what. I'll rate it in the comments after I hear it edited.
Okay.
It depends on how much of my stuttering and blathering you manage to filter out. If you make me sound good, it'll be a good score. I'm just saying.
I'll make your voice deeper so you sound more manly.
Wait, is that a problem I have?
It's a problem I have. Well, I guess it's the thing of listening to your own voice that sounds different from the reverberations.
Yeah, and I actually do have a stuffy nose right now, so I you always sound nasally when you hear yourself in a recording, but
I have a sore throat, so we're both dying.
Yeah,
so
that's the end. This is the last thing anyone will ever hear of us. I did not want to go out like this.
Anyway, you can check out Swain's work at it's The-Swain at
The-Swain.com. Not that any of that's relevant. Yeah, there's no dash or anything. Just
there'll be links in the description. Also to Project Nexus links as well. So thank you for your time today, Michael.
You're welcome, Sean. It's good to hear from you again.
Is it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, you had a hiatus for a while. We're glad to have you back.
It's all right. We'll be doing a podcast soon anyway.
Yeah, so. We'll see you guys tomorrow.
All right. Goodbye, Michael.
Goodbye.